Alright, this one came up kind of abruptly because, I had just recently blind bought Vanderfelder. I had always wanted to see it, I had always heard about it, but I never actually saw it. So I got it. And before I even started it, I was like, well, how can I use this to my advantage where I have to work a little less? Oh yeah, I'll just put it up against something. And what is a movie where an alien comes down to Earth and takes human form and tries to perform certain tasks? And oh, of course, it is a movie that also happens to share a name with an extremely famous song by the guy in the other movie.
Dun dun dun.
So, hooray, we have one now.
Welcome back to Versus in 2016, by the way.
Yes. So, that's obviously in tone, they are totally and completely different. So this is where I think I'm going to start with the Manufactured Earth, actually, because it's freshest in my mind, obviously. And it's by Nicholas Roeg, who has done a lot of movies that get a lot of attention, but the two that have stood out to me the most he's done are obviously Don't Look Now, naturally, and Walkabout. It doesn't seem like it'd be my kind of thing, but I actually really like Walkabout a lot. And so this starts off, and it's you can tell immediately that this is kind of a story that the movie kind of got a jump start on this story before it started kind of becoming, because when you see it, it kind of feels like kind of routine, like an alien comes down and then they find out it's an alien and then the government swarms in and it's the whole thing. But not only did this movie kind of get the jump on that story, well, it's also not even like, you know, the big budget movies that have the government come in and stuff, like Starman, for instance, or E.T., for instance. Though E.T. doesn't have near as many dicks and naked people, of course.
To say the least.
E.T. doesn't really wear clothes, so there's that. But the thing is it was also a clear inspiration for a lot of art stuff like Under the Skin. I imagine this was a massive inspiration for Under the Skin.
Really?
And it's a lot more into, despite having, you know, some of those things in its story for whatever importance obviously in a movie like this, the story kind of takes a backseat as far as importance. It's just one of those movies. So it's a lot more, if you want to compare it to something that is newer than it, it's a lot more under the skin and a lot less like Starman or something. So and of course you realize that Bowie is kind of an eerily great casting choice. There were a number of people involved that were more famous faces at the time. But obviously Bowie's music career was, you know, gigantic, but he kind of seemed like an outside choice for the part and ultimately ended up with it. And it's one of those things where you kind of can't really imagine anybody else once you realize that David Bowie was cast. Because that whole physique is kind of what's already there, and people like say, you know, oh my god, you're so thin, and he's just kind of stands out in a crowd anyway. And they didn't do anything to alter his appearance. It's just David Bowie. Obviously, when we see him in his true form, there was some clear altering, but probably not as much as you would think. And not only that, but his performance really, really fits too. He was, he just kind of, he's obviously a natural born performer just in general. But I'm surprised he's not in more movies. I mean, he's in quite a few movies, but I'm surprised he's not in more movies than he is. Because he also feels like a natural actor, too. When that really, really comes through in this movie in particular. Though, like I said, he just kind of... It probably helps he's just perfectly cast to begin with. That's always an asset. There's one particular scene when, after he meets Candy Carr's character and she starts showing him the ways of a human life and stuff, before she knows what he really is. And she takes him, in between sex sessions, she takes him to church. Because that's the logical thing to do, of course.
That makes sense.
And it's this really great thing where obviously, he is an alien among humans. That's clear. This is very obvious, clear stuff, but still very well done. So naturally, when we're panning across the crowd in church, when you just see, even though he looks like his normal self, like David Bowie, when you see him in the middle of the crowd in the church as the camera pans over, he immediately stands out. And it's just this, and of course I kind of had a stupid moment where obviously he's an alien who is adapting to things, and it's great to see those moments where he's kind of, there's a few subtle things in there where he's kind of adapting, like the moment when he goes to see Buck Henry for the first time, and he's talking about his patents that ultimately make him rich, and you can kind of tell he's still kind of going through his language and adapting, because he pronounces it patents, and then immediately corrects himself and says patents, like he knew, kind of like he knows it's not. Yeah, it's just that kind of thing where you notice those tiny little adaptations he makes as he goes, and he kind of has to correct some of the things he gets wrong. So we get to this church scene, and then the pastor or whatever asks him to sing something, and so she gives him the book, and it's like, and just I was so immersed in the idea that this wasn't David Bowie, and this was actually this character. I just so far was not thinking about who he really is. I saw Newton open the book, and I was like, what's it gonna be like when he sings? I was like, oh my fuck. He's fucking David Bowie.
Oh, wow. Really?
No, that's just how far gone I was distant. I mean, even though it looked, obviously he's David Bowie.
Yeah.
They did nothing to change his appearance. No. I just bought him so much as an alien character, it just completely did not occur to me.
I wonder what it's like when he sings. Really?
Oh, God. But even so, even being David Bowie, they could have had Newton sing differently. But he just kind of blends in with the crowd. You don't really hear him, but he pretty much sounded like David Bowie.
Of course he did.
Oh, sweet Jesus. So, and then eventually he meets Rip Torn, who is this womanizing college professor who is addicted to fucking his 18-year-old students. So, a lot of 70s sex montages, which totally were fitting for the time. He has a great moment where he's like narrating, and he's talking about pretty much the only two things that concern him in the world are fucking and world enterprises, and that's all he's concerned about. And it's during one of these introduction scenes that not only is it kind of a, I guess I wouldn't say foreshadowing thing, but it kind of a little hint at something that's kind of an underlying thing, but also it's an exercise in the way this movie uses camera work and editing. The first time we see him with one of his students, there's this really fetching point of view shot when she walks in, and then there's the cutting back and forth of him watching some sword fight of sorts at some live entertainment thing, and Rip Torn fucking this student, and it's like really swiftly cutting back and forth, and it's kind of throughout the entire movie, it's kind of a recurring theme where we kind of get the idea that there's something that's not really fully explained that's in there somewhere, where Newton and Rip Torn's character are connected in some kind of way, and not just the way they're connected within the story. In that moment where like Rip Torn is having like visions of him, which is also, there's a number of things in this movie that aren't explained that you could totally go into, most likely with multiple viewings. It's definitely one of those movies. On top of being atmosphere, there's definitely an atmosphere going on, but we kind of get it in two different doses. There's there's him within Earth and all that, and its people, but then we have these scenes where we flash back to his home planet with his family. And I'm not really quite sure how we're supposed to take them, but to me, the atmosphere is really, really creepy. Just this whole thing. I mean, it's a tragic thing because he lost his family on his planet because of the drought that he is here to try to fix. But, something about those scenes on his home planet I just found really unsettling. And I guess that kind of goes further in when she finally sees him in his true form. To the point that she explicitly pisses herself. That's That's kind of the genuine reaction you would have, of course. And of course, there's the whole thing where it's probably a whole statement in regards to he comes down here because he has to. He wants to get rich off of these patents that he has for inventions, and then ultimately build something to transport water from Earth to his home planet to end its drought. Because we are clearly like a planet of water. They have like their own name for us because we are the planet of water. But the thing is he ends up getting sidetracked because he's on Earth, and much like I guess the big statement is much like we as humans in our normal life get distracted from what really matters by TV and like alcohol and stuff like that. So naturally, Newton becomes addicted to watching like 10 TVs at once and alcohol. And basically everything becomes an addiction to him. And he totally gets sidetracked from what he was put on Earth to begin with for. And that's just a whole clear statement to itself. That's not exactly we're not exactly in subtle grounds in these territories, but nevertheless, we still get to that point. And there's a moment at first where I was put off, where it seems like 1 minute he and Candy Clark, she's like totally insane for him, but he's of course talking about his wife, which she doesn't realize is on another planet and probably dead at the time. But it seems like once his addiction set in and she realizes how this is going to work, it's like she kind of hates him instantaneously, which was kind of off-putting at first, because it was kind of like, well, that was a big turn really fast. But then, as the movie progresses, you tend to realize that the passage of time through this movie is kind of shown in a seamless manner, to where you don't really realize it until the clues start to form and people start aging. Because obviously Newton is not aging while everybody else is getting older and more decrepit and going more on a downward spiral, and he's just kind of in the same place despite giving into vices everywhere. Yeah, as I was saying, this is definitely an art house movie up and down. I don't really, though I don't know what else you would expect going into it. I knew what kind of movie I was getting into when I went into this, of course. Especially being familiar with Rogue Zeller works. I was saying, it's definitely, it's not only just the time jumps, but there's also different kinds of jumps from other things. There's the whole thing about how Newton can kind of see like back into the past, back when things were like when roads didn't exist, yet he can see them and then they can see him, and then suddenly he's back in reality. It's a real kind of mindfuck thing going on, and there's no real explanation as to what's happening and when. You just kind of have to piece it together, and it's definitely, and it doesn't come off like one of those ones that's just senseless art house bullshit. If you really watch it, there's definitely, something you can keep up with. It's just gonna probably take you 2 or 3 times to really kind of soak in everything that this movie's throwing at you. It can be a bit uneven at times. There are some portions of it that are infinitely more interesting than others. It's 2 hours and 20 minutes. That's pretty long for a movie like this, given the directions that it goes. But for the most part, it definitely has enough to offer to where the experience certainly isn't in vain. So it's definitely, I'm very interested to see what it's like on multiple go-arounds. So, and catching more things and all that. So it's definitely an experience I appreciated and was very much looking forward to when I was able to finally get around to it. And I just love Bowie as an actor in general. I would love to see him do more stuff like this also. This was like, 1975 or 76?
The last thing he did in the movie was Zoolander?
I
really can't think of anything after that.
That could be. I said, I think the only other real starring role I had besides this was Labyrinth. I don't think there was really... Sometimes I get... Not them. I don't get them confused. But sometimes I confuse his movie roles with that of Mick Jagger's. Like, The Man from Elysian Fields was Mick Jagger. I always think it's Bowie. And I get them mixed up sometimes. But...
Oh, yeah, that's right. He was in The Prestige.
Yeah, he was Tesla.
Yeah.
So, yes. Now, going on to Starman. Yes. despite that connection I made about coming down to Earth, taking human form, and David Bowie Starman, these movies could not be more different. We have John Carpenter brings us Starman. Sorry if this is an eyesore. This is the only copy I have of Starman's in a 2-pack with Close Encounters, but hopefully we'll get to Close Encounters at some point. Sorry if this is like a horrible tease or something. Should we do one of these for Close Encounters? I have a normal copy of Close Encounters that's much, much nicer. It's like this fucking thick, and it's awesome. Hopefully that'll come around at some point. But in the meantime, John Carpenter brings us Starman, which was Jeff Bridges' 3rd Oscar nomination, I think, after The Last Picture Show and Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. This is, it's not what you think it is when it starts. Number one, you see John Carpenter's name, you hear the score, you feel like you could be in for anything. And I think this was like almost an immediate follow-up to The Thing, I think, because I think The Thing was 82, this was 84. And then we open, and it really looks like it's going to be like, there's a lot of suggestion it's going to be like a big special effects space movie in this big opening. But honestly, when it all comes down to it, and the bare bones factor of it, despite some stuff that does happen throughout and keeps the movie, alive, and in more of the vein of what you were probably looking for when you saw the first few frames, Starman, above all else, is a love story. Because we have Karen Allen has just lost her husband, who obviously is Jeff Bridges. So when the alien comes down, he's just called Starman. That's just how he's credited. He finds her house, comes across her house, and sees a picture of Bridges, and sees his there's a lock of his hair in a scrapbook that he uses his DNA from, and morphs into the body of her dead husband despite being the alien. And then it kind of, while it's also mainly a love story, it's also a road movie above all else as well. When they have to go, we have to go to his particular destination so he can do what he needs to do. And it's kind of this really heart-wrenching thing where it's the alien, but it's also her husband, but obviously it's not her husband by any means, and she still kind of ends up falling in love with him, but it could be because of the alien, it could be because it looks like her husband, it's a whole thing going on. And it's very interesting to watch this play out, mainly from, Karen Allen's very good in this, of course, but, Bridges had to earn that Oscar nomination, and he certainly does, because we actually see him in whole movies as the husband before he died, which is just normal Jeff Bridges. 80s Jeff Bridges, not kooky now Jeff Bridges.
Far out.
So yes, we love all forms of Jeff Bridges. We're not prejudiced. So we obviously see him as a normal human, but then obviously throughout most of the movie, pretty much all of the movie, obviously, Bridges has to play this person where that's the thing, is Jeff Bridges has a lot of charm that just kind of oozes out of him and is very identifiable. Jeff Bridges is a very identifiable presence when he's on screen. So for him to have to kind of rein all of that in and be this being that barely knows how to move or behave like a human or speak, and just everything around him, his walk is always very odd because he's adapting to this body, and just the way he's basically playing two different characters, even though we don't really see the husband apart from inside the whole movies, there's still definitely something that Bridges had to kind of bounce off of and be the opposite of when he played the alien in the same body. So, and he does, as the movie goes on, he does progressively become more and more human, but never entirely. So there's always that stuff. And obviously, given this setup and given the fact that it's an 80s movie, this sets it up for a lot of humor. This movie is actually surprisingly really funny, too, despite all of it. You don't know what you're in for because it's a Carpenter movie, which sets you in for something that might be creepy, but then the opening sets you up for some big, extravagant space movie. Then the plot sets in, and you have a love story / road movie. There's just all different genres being thrown at you at once, and you don't know which one it's going to ultimately go with. But on top of that, there's a lot of funny stuff in here. Sometimes it's stuff that's obviously funny, like while he's adapting. And then sometimes it just might be just one small thing in there that's just kind of makes you chuckle or something. But there's the stuff like when he can't tell the difference between the bathrooms, obvious stuff like that. When he's trying to distinguish the difference between giving somebody a thumbs up and giving somebody the finger.
California howdy.
My favorite line is when he's he only knows how to drive by watching her, and so his interpretation of stoplights is red means stop, green means go, yellow means go very fast, which of course almost gets them killed, but it's all in good fun for that stuff. There's also but yeah, there are stuff where those other genres kind of start to show up, like despite predominantly being a love story / road movie, while also being an aliens on Earth, everybody called the government, Charles Martin Smith doing all his stuff. There are some different elements in here, like sci-fi, and there's a little bit... The beginning is kind of terrifying, where we have... when he's morphing in the living room and she's watching this happen, he starts off as like a mutant baby. And we see this mutant baby grow into Jeff Bridges through special effects. Special effects given to us by Stan Winston and Rick Baker. So you know they're fucked up, but incredible at the same time. They're very 80s, but still, you know, you can't go wrong with those two names. Especially in that department. And it's very much, it actually feels more like a Cronenberg scene than a Carpenter scene. And it's really kind of disturbing, but it actually ends up being the birth of this kind of tender love story. But there's actually also a moment, and you can't really say one echoes the other because they're the exact same year, but there's a scene in this that's like an exact scene in The Terminator, when the truck explodes and he walks out, only he's holding her, and he has to like revive her. Like I said, you can't really say the Terminator took it from this or this took it from the Terminator because they were the exact same year. So there's, and the score is really good too. So yes, this definitely, it's definitely an interesting term for Carpenter. Like, I sometimes forget it's his movie. And yes, Bridges' nomination is very much deserved. He was beat by F. Murray Abraham for Amadeus, which I can understand. But still, it's a very inspired nomination for sure. Like, I don't know if a nomination like this would happen today, because it's such a lot of it's a very, very, you know, heartfelt performance and a very complicated one. But it's also really comedic in all that too. So there's a lot of stuff that he accomplished here, and it was really this was like I think he was still relatively known for mostly supporting roles when he did this one. So this was kind of a starting point for him to show what he could do with leading roles. And I think this was I'm sure there were more in there, but this one was actually, I imagine, a huge propeller in his leading career. So, having said all that, choosing between the two, like I said, they're so different. I don't know, and especially I've seen one a few times, and obviously The Man Who Fell to Earth is quite new to me. So it's really hard to say right now. Obviously, I'm inclined to go for Starman because I already kind of have a connection to it, and I just love how it has all those different things going on, and it has that kind of tender emotional quality to it. And like I said, Man Who Fell to Earth has a lot of great stuff in there, but it kind of feels a little, with such a long runtime, there's space for it to kind of have those parts that kind of are not as spectacular as some of the other ones, and it makes the movie kind of ultimately feel uneven as it goes. But seeing it a few more times could totally change that. I don't know. So I naturally, in kind of an unfair battle, I would say Starman. But like I said, they're so different. That's kind of a difficult thing to say. But
all right. So ends another edition of Versus. Later tonight at 8 o'clock p.m. on NBC here on the East Coast, of course, will be the Golden Globes. And we did our predictions yesterday, so you check those out.
Which may or may not be totally disastrous, but...
Yeah, we'll see what happens with those. Versus will continue next week. Your cryptic comment is High Speed Chase, and that will be your Versus for Sunday. So, that being said, I want to thank you guys and girls out there for watching. Next week, AJ reviews more movies. It's January, so I can't tell you exactly what's coming out next week. There's a lot of things. 13 Hours, I think, is coming out. Right along to... The Forest is going to be on that video as well. So, there's that. So that being said, I want to thank you guys and girls out there for watching. AJ, any parting words?
That's it.